Great. Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everybody. It is truly so fun to see you all this morning and some familiar faces. Like Nicole said, we've done a few of these now, and yeah, it's just really fun to see people coming back. And I've even heard from some of you that you've been practicing and playing with the skills we've been working on, which is so amazing. And that's really my whole goal with these workshops, is to break down the process so that it's understandable, it's not so intimidating, and you know how to practice on your own. Because sometimes that's the scariest part, is looking at this blank paper and feeling like, well, what do I do? you know? And so I hope that today and in upcoming workshops, you're able to take what we learn and then make it your own by practicing the skills that we work on together. So for those of you who were here in our last workshop, which was in January, we covered the basic tools, kind of the equipment we use to paint. And now we're going to be building on that by diving into how paint actually works and how we can use our brush strategically to create a wide variety of shapes and lines. And so the fun thing is that we're just going to be using one color today. Now you can pick any color you want, and feel free to just, pick your favorite color. I'm choosing blue because I just love blue. As you can see, I'm wearing a lot of blue today. But one of my favorite colors in my palette is Prussian blue. This is just a gorgeous, rich blue that is very versatile. So I'll be using this today. That said, if you are working from a pan set, so pre-formatted colors that are in a little container, that's totally fine. I'll try to talk you through how to do the same techniques as if you're using a tube. So we don't have a ton of time today, so we're just going to jump right in. And please feel free to chime in with questions in the chat. Nicole will be sure to bring them to my attention. So, this is meant to be interactive, and don't be afraid to just, pipe in if you have any questions. All right, so you may have seen these examples in the email that Nicole sent about the workshop. I'll be referring to these today, but don't worry if you don't have this nearby. We'll be emailing this out later along with this example so that you can continue practicing with a little bit of a visual reference. So I'll put that off to the side. Okay, so why do we want to just start with one color as we get into our lesson today? Well, the wonderful thing about practicing with one color is that it eliminates the complexity of decision fatigue, and it helps you really understand the concept of value, color value. And in painting, color value is how saturated the color is, essentially, how dark or light the color is. And so when you turn a photograph black and white, like these flowers here, what you notice are the light and the dark. They really pop. And so as you go to practice on your own, maybe you have a photograph that you took that you want to try to practice from. Well, if you turn it into a black and white photograph, you'll really be able to see the values of that subject without getting all confused by the colors. So that's really our goal today. So before we dive into our botanical elements, what we're going to do is just a quick little study of how to create different values with this color that we've selected. So I've gone ahead and squirted out a little blob of paint here onto my mixing area. If you need to grab a little plate or anything in a flat surface, we are going to need a little palette area for mixing today. So feel free to hop up and get that if you need it. Otherwise, we're going to start by doing our little value study. And with watercolor, the way you change the value of a paint is simply by adding water. And the more water you add, the lighter that color will become. So basically, I'll show you my little example here. We are going to be creating a series of circles that go from dark to light just by adding a little more water each time. All right, so I've got my tube paint squirted out here, and I'm just wetting my brush a little bit to get it nice and ready for paint. And now I'm going to wipe that brush on the side of my cup a little bit, and I'm going to go right into my paint. Now, because this is freshly squirted out paint, it's already a little bit liquidy. I don't need to work it very much to get it to move. But if you're using pre-dried paint, you're going to need to take a minute or so to swirl your water into your paint and get it workable and activated. So I'll try to not go too fast here, but once that paint is ready, we're going to take it straight from that little blob to our paper. And I'm just going to create a circle here. And this is basically as dark as this color can be. I'm really using the least amount of water possible and going straight from the paint to the paper. So that is the darkest version of that color. All right. Now, basically, as we continue, the process is you're going to dip your brush in your water and then just kind of touch that brush into your paint and make it a little more wet than it was before. So I'm kind of dipping that brush into the blob and then swirling it with water on my paint palette just beneath that blob. And now I can do another circle. And this one will be a little bit lighter than the one above it. And then I'll do the same thing, dip my brush in water. And now I'll put that water in that area that I just mixed before. So I'm essentially just making this blue a little bit lighter with more water. And we'll do another one. So go at your own pace here. You're going to just continue making little circles down your page until you get to the bottom. And the goal is that by the time you get to the bottom, you have very, very light blue on your brush. So just keep adding more and more water as you go. And there might be some where you don't notice much difference, and that's okay. That's just a sign you need to add a little more water next time.
It's always so incredible to see the range of color coming through. You have one color.
Isn't that incredible?
It is. That's why I love watercolor. It's incredible.
Oh, it's so versatile. Yeah. I mean, that's why you can do so much just with one color. You know, here we have a whole palette here just by adding water. So yeah, that's one of my favorite things about it too. All right, so I'm getting close to the bottom here. And might be able to do one more. Let's see. Yeah. So as we continue on with our practice today, we'll be essentially using, you know, a few of these values and layering them to create our botanical shapes. So once you've got your values laid out here, I'm gonna show you how to mix up some areas of your palette where you can have a light area, a middle area, and a dark area. And that way they're ready to go and we can kind of pull from them as needed. So right here, I've got, I've already kind of started this area with color. So I'm just going to mix up what I've done all together here. This is going to be kind of my middle value. And you can test it out, see if it's dark enough, light enough. Basically, we don't necessarily need all of these options. We really just need a dark, a middle, and a light. So just kind of add a little water into that section, add a little more paint as needed, swirl it around, and that's going to be your area. Now you can also do this if you have a divided palette and little cups or little areas, little wells. You can do that in those areas and that will keep it a little more easily divided. But honestly, I enjoy working on a flat area like this because I can kind of mix the areas together a little bit too. So they're both good options. All right, so down here, I'm going to create my light value. So I'm starting by just adding water. And then I'll grab a touch of my paint, add more water. And another nice thing about working with just one color is it's this easy to make your palette. It's just a matter of adding a little more water to the paint. Okay, so this is going to be my light value. And then I'll put my dark value up at the top here, and I'll keep it pretty concentrated. It needs to be more workable than that paint straight from the tube, but still dark. So I'm just adding a little bit of water to this one. Okay. So as we move forward, I'll be referring to, use your light, use your middle, use your dark. And so mix more up as you need to as we go. But that's kind of how we'll be working today. All right, before we jump into our flower shapes, let's go ahead and just play with our brush a little bit and see what it can do. I am using a number 6 round brush today. A round brush is just a lovely versatile brush. It comes to a very nice point, so you can do detail, but you can also do wide areas as well. So what I want you to do is take your middle color, swirl your brush in it, and just do a stroke that feels comfortable. However you would kind of hold a pencil, just hold your brush and with whatever pressure feels natural for you, draw a line down your page. Okay, now, once you've done that line, you're going to just either kind of swirl your brush on your palette, and this is going to squeeze some extra water out of your brush, or you can wipe it on the edge of your dirty water cup. But basically, we're trying to remove some moisture from the brush, but still keep the color on it. So I've done my little swirl here, and now I'm going to try to draw a very thin line because I've removed that excess water. So now I'm holding the brush so just the tip is touching the paper and drawing a line down the page. So the goal is that it's noticeably thinner than the line you drew first. Okay, so really the key to a thin line is removing water as much as possible. And we do that by just kind of pressing the brush bristles and swirling them around, and that'll squirt out the excess water. Finally, let's go ahead and do a wide stroke. And so for this one, you're going to, let's use our light color. We need a good amount of water on our brush for this one. So what I'm going to do is actually dip the brush in my water cup first. And this is called loading the brush. It's getting it wet first. And then I'm going to go straight to my color and swirl it in there, load it up really good. When the brush is wet, the bristles can absorb even more pigment. So that's one strategy to getting a little more ability to do a wide stroke from your brush. So now I'm going to hold my brush at a lower angle to the paper, press down and press those bristles as much as I can to where they spread out and create a really wide stroke. So you could do this with a darker color too. Just remember that as you add more water to it, it's going to lighten the color a little bit. So I just went with the light color there, but this shows you what a range we have with this one brush. We can go medium, thin, thick, all with the same brush. All right, so now I want to practice how we can start to use a combination of these values and work together to start to layer and create some more complexity. But first, let's play with a little technique that I love called wet on wet. And this is going to be used in several of our flower shapes here, especially these round ones. So first we're going to start, we're not even thinking of a flower yet. We're going to start with our light value, and we're going to load up our brush with it by just swirling it in there. And now I'm going to create a nice large circle on my paper. Not too large, but bigger than the ones you did for the value study. And you might need to get more paint on your brush to get it big enough. So you kind of start with a circle, get a little more paint, and then keep going. But mine is going to be about like this. And now I'm going to get my medium color, swirl my brush in there. Another nice thing about using just one color is you don't need to rinse your brush as much because it just has the same color on it. So I'm going straight into this medium color. And now what I want to do is just touch that medium color into the wet circle. And I'm just dabbing with the tip of my brush here in little dabs that kind of come out from the middle and go around. Then I might rub my brush a little bit. I'm basically just trying to create a darker blue area within that lighter circle. And so because that light circle is wet, we can do some lovely blending on the surface of the paper. The water will help us spread that color around and get a nice even blend there. And then finally, once you've got that medium color kind of worked into an area, let's get our dark color. Again, I'm just going straight into this color here, swirling my brush into it. And now I'm just going to dab that dark into the very middle of the circle. And it's going to gently spread out, not too much, hopefully. And so now we have our values layered on top of each other. kind of just defining that center with our dark. And so this technique, the wet on wet technique, is just wonderful for getting that looser, softer, blended look that is so lovely, especially for botanicals. And we'll be expanding on this idea in a few minutes. Okay, now we're going to do a similar process here, but with wet on dry. And that just means we're going to leave a little time for the paint to dry on the surface of the paper before adding our next color. So we'll kind of do an area and then we'll practice something else and then we'll come back to it and we'll kind of go back and forth for a minute. So again, let's start with our light value. And I'm just swirling my brush into my light area. And I'll go ahead and make a circle that's a similar size to the first one. Again, you might need a little more paint on your brush. You might need to go back and forth a couple times. That's okay. All right, so this is the base layer. And that's all we're going to do for right now. We're going to let that dry. And as that dries, we're going to play with some leaves. And if you have some room still on your paper, just you can keep using the same paper. All right, now I won't spend too much time on this. I know some of you have probably learned this technique from me before, but it's such a fun one and very, very versatile, especially when we're using these botanical techniques and creating bouquets like we'll be doing in a little bit. So just a quick overview of my favorite leaf technique. I'm going to use my medium color here. And some of mine has traveled. My table is slightly slanted, so all the water just flows down. But I'm loading up my brush with my medium color. And I'm just gonna wipe it a couple times on this open area of my palette to remove a little moisture. And now I can create my leaf. So a quick overview here of the leaf shape is essentially you're creating a line and the line changes width as you go. So we start with a very light touch from our brush. Then we press our brush down and slowly lift as we end that leaf. And then we can take that little dot that's kind of at the bottom of the leaf and pull it into a stem. So again, I'll get my medium value on my brush. It's a light touch, press and pull and lift. And then you can do a little stem to finish it off. So it takes a few times to get the hang of it, and that's okay. But just take a couple of minutes here and practice this little leaf. If there's anything you're having an issue with, just let me know. Feel free to type a question. So this is just such a fun one to be really proficient at, because once you really get this leaf down, you can vary it to create different size leaves, different length leaves. It's just really that feel, that touch of the brush where you understand the light start pressing and pulling and then gently lifting at the end. And that process is the same whether you're creating a leaf like this, or let's say I want to do a longer leaf. I can load up my brush with some extra water and do the same thing. Light touch, pull. I'm just pulling farther and slowly lifting. So it really is a fun one to practice, and we'll be using it a little bit in our bouquet. All right, now let's see how our circle is feeling. It's a little bit wet still, but I think since we're just practicing, I'm going to go ahead and show you the next layer. Basically, we're just layering our values going from light to dark, but the difference is this time the paper is now dry. So I'm getting my medium value now on my brush, and I'm going to go right over top of this light circle, fill it in. And as you can see, the difference is because that layer was dry underneath, we see the edge of that circle very clearly. It's its own, kind of precise area. Whereas when that paper was wet, we get the soft blending. And so these are just both techniques that you can use in strategic ways to create different effects. One is not right or wrong. They're just different ways to use the color and the water. And so finally, this might blend on me a little bit here, but to do that dark value, I can get my dark, and now I can do a very precise, and it's going to blend a little bit, and that's okay. But I think you probably get the idea. You can layer more precisely when you let that paint dry on the paper first. So that's the whole idea there. Okay. Now I know we're going pretty quick here, but I think it's time to jump into some flowers because I want to make sure we get to our bouquet. So basically, we're going to be taking these concepts and just roughly adjusting them to create botanical forms. I'm going to go ahead and switch to a new page just so I can really fill it up, but feel free to keep going on the same one. This is still just practice. All right. I want to start with a flower that I think it's kind of an anemone flower. I have it in this bouquet here. It's this flower that has a dark center and these petals that radiate out from the center. Oh yeah, I love these. They're so fun to do. So let's just walk through it. We're going to start with our light value, and feel free to mix up more if you need to. I think I've still got a pretty good amount here. Okay, so we're going to be using our wet on wet technique to start with, and then we'll do a little bit of layering to add some detail at the end. Okay, I'm going to lower this just slightly so you can see a little bit better. Okay. So I'm loading up my brush here with my lightest color. And I'm going to start by making a circle on the paper. Not too big, just enough to kind of define the center point of that flower. Now, I think the anemone has 6 petals. Don't quote me on that. We're going to pretend it has 6 petals, and they're going to radiate out from this circle. So basically, I'm going to start in this circle and kind of just wiggle my brush out in this angled petal shape and then kind of wiggle the brush at the top to make it a little bit softer. And I'm just gonna rotate around, wiggle, wiggle. You do want to work fairly quickly because we want to make sure the paint stays wet and workable to get the blending that we want. So I'm just, yeah, kind of doing these little short strokes that sweep out from the middle and blend together to form that petal shape. And now I'm going to shift right to my medium color and I'm going to dab it into the middle of that circle. And it's going to start to spread out really nicely. And then what I want to do is just keep that medium color on the brush, but remove a little extra water. So I'm just wiping it on the palette there. And now I'm going to do some little strokes that just kind of come out and just create a little bit of shading on those petals. Okay. And then the very last thing I'll do is take my dark color, swirl my brush in there, and dab it into the very middle of that flower. And that's where I'm going to leave it for this first stage before we add a little bit more detail. So what we have after our first pass with the wet on wet is something that's kind of like this. And of course, you can vary how much medium value you put in there. If you want it to be more light, you know, you can skip that step altogether. I just wanted to show you how you can create that nice blending within a defined area and kind of build in your values while it's still wet and workable. So there's flower number one, and we'll come back to it in just a minute. Okay, now flower number two, let's see here. We're going to do, let's try a rose, something like this. And this might look really intimidating, but I promise it's not as hard as it looks. Okay, we're gonna start again with our light value and load up our brush really well. All right, so basically, again, we're starting with a circle. And you can kind of just go around and around until you start to hit the area of the flower that you think will become the outer petals. So this is kind of the innermost part of the flower. And now we want to just kind of go out with our brush a little bit and angle it around or curve it around until we hit the end of a petal and then bring it back into the circle. So we're coming out from the circle, curving around, and you might even wiggle the brush a little bit as you curve, and then come back into the circle. Come out, curve around, and this essentially is we're creating the overall shape of the flower, almost like if you were to fill it in with one color and just see the outer shape. And that defines the base of that shape. And then what you can do is get your medium color swirled around here. And now I'm just going to with the tip of my brush, start in the middle and create a spiral that starts in the middle and comes out. And as I get farther out, I'm going to press my brush a little bit harder. And I'm just for this one going to go to where those outer petals start. So it's kind of just defining that middle part of the flower. Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it for this first layer. We'll add a little more detail in a minute. And so it does, you know, I have the advantage here of looking at a flower. It definitely helps to see one and then refer to it. So I know if you don't have this nearby, it might be like, what is that shape again? But don't worry, this is just to get a basic idea of the process. And as you go and practice later, hopefully it'll really start to click. Okay, let's do a similar one. And this is another favorite of mine, a ranunculus flower. It's very similar to the rose, but it's more compact and it has these concentric circles rather than that spiral of the rose. So we're gonna start the same way, just a slightly different shape. So we've got our light value here. I'm adding a little more water because mine has gotten a little dry on my palette. So I'm just mixing it up a little bit more again. All right. So this ranunculus, it's sort of at a bit of an angle, and the center is, you know, at the top part of the angle. And then we really are just seeing the outer petals in this lower part here. But to start with, we're going to be thinking about kind of the overall shape as we add that first layer. The difference is when we create our circle, we're going to leave a little bit of space between our strokes. And what I mean is, let's start with a little circle here. It's kind of an oval because it's at an angle. So we're thinking about that shape from the beginning. And now I'm gonna keep building my circle, but I might leave a little bit of white space in between that first circle and then kind of this ring around it. So I'm not going to do rings all the way around, but I'm just aware that I want to keep a few little open spaces in that area where the petals are tightly wrapped around each other. So I'm building up the circle basically by adding these rings around that center point. And then leaving a little bit of space in between them to define that area a little bit. And so that's going to be kind of just the innermost part of the flower. Now, I do see a little bit of a petal behind this main section. So I'm going to take my brush and just curve a petal around that kind of pops out in the back there, and one on the other side. And then I'm going to really define these front petals by just starting by drawing the bottom curve of that flower. That tells me where that main section of petal is. And now I can just fill it in with my light color and do the same thing here. So we're just working with that light color, but thinking about how we can use the white of the paper as well to define that shape a little bit. And kind of like with the rose, let's take our medium value and going to dip it in the water. And I'm just going to now kind of just draw in, not all the lines, but just a few lines on top of that light layer to give a little more depth to those inner petals. And we'll add more detail in a minute, but that's enough to get started with. Okay.
Leanna, I had a question reach out to
Okay.
us separately. Would there ever be a situation where we'd want to change the brush we're using for the finer lines?
Yes, that's a great question. Absolutely. I of course have a range of brushes, and when I'm really getting into detail, I love to use a smaller brush. I have this number 2 brush here, and I wanted to stick with one brush today just to show you what's possible with one brush. But absolutely, they make different sizes, for a reason. It's great to have some smaller ones on hand for that detail. Yeah, great question. And if you have one, feel free to switch over to that, whenever you feel like you need it. All right. So one last little flower I want to show you. This is just a sweet one that is kind of simple and quick. And that's this little flower right here. I don't even know what it is, to be totally honest with you, but it's just a little 4-petal flower with a little center point. So this one, we're going to stick with our light value. And when I'm doing a flower that has radiating petals, even this anemone, we kind of did it this way. I like to define the center point by just drawing a dot first. And that kind of anchors the petals and tells me, all right, this is the point where they all rotate around. So now from this little center point, I can draw my petals, and I'm going to draw the outline first and then fill it in, just kind of moving from one to the next. And that's really it. We can do a couple here. Start with one, draw the outline, fill it in. The key is it's nice to work a little bit quickly so that the paint all blends together as you go. But otherwise, it's a pretty simple one. Okay. So here we have some starts of flowers that we can use in a bouquet, however we want to use them. And so I think we're pretty much to a point where we can start to layer in a little detail. And to do this, I'll mainly be using this dark value. I may use the middle value a little bit, but mostly it's going to be this dark value. And this is where, if you do have a smaller brush, feel free to use it, because we're going to be doing some smaller marks here. Okay. For the anemone, what I want to do is just add in a little more dark into the middle to define it more and really draw the eye into that center of the flower. Anemones also have these little radiating stamens, I think they're called, and they kind of rotate around that circle. So I'm going to simplify them a lot. I'm just going to do little dots that rotate around that circle. So here I'm using the tippy tip of my brush, and I'm just going to do little dots that rotate around. And that is the main detail. What I might also do is get just my medium value here. And I'm going to wipe my brush off a little bit so I can do a nice thin line with this medium value. And I'm going to pull a little bit of that dark out from the middle. And I'm just really defining the edge of the petal here. So wherever that petal, you know, has an edge, I'm just doing a thin line that divides one petal from the next. And this just gives it a little bit of separation and a tiny bit of detail. And yeah, we're gonna keep it there, I think. You can, of course, get so detailed when it comes to flowers. And, you know, that's where your own stylistic expression comes out, how you want to represent the flower. You might really be drawn to detail and you want to show every little line of the petal. And that's wonderful. So kind of that's the part that's fun and up to you to decide. But let's go ahead and move on to our rose. So again, we're going to do our dark value. And when we did our medium value on the rose, we basically just drew a spiral that was continuous and it went around and around all the way to the outer edge. What we're going to do on this layer is still think about a spiral, but it's not going to all connect. We're going to create basically segments of the spiral that have a little bit of space in between. So I'm going right over top of where I did my medium value, but I'm going to kind of do a little section of the spiral and then stop. Get a little more dark. And then I might come up, maybe I'll start up here and do this part of the spiral and stop. And what I like to do on this rose is instead of having it just be a line that kind of is even all the way around, I like to press a little bit harder in the middle of that line so that I have some nice contrast between the start of the line and the end of the line. So it just gives it some thickness and variation in the line weight. I'm going to keep going here. And I'll go all the way to the outside of where those petals are concentrated. And I'm also actually going to define the middle of that rose a little bit more by putting a circle in the middle. So there we have our rose. And if you want to make those outer petals pop a little bit more, you can get your medium value. I'm going to mix a little more up here. And just with a little bit of that medium on your brush, you can go over top of this lighter area and just sort of darken it in a little bit. Maybe you kind of run it along that upper edge. And then what you can do is rinse off your brush and get a little bit of clear water on your brush. I like to wipe it off a little bit. And then you can fade the bottom edge of that medium value so that you start to get a little bit of a rounded look on that petal. So the water can be used in a precise way to do some blending in a specific area. And that effect can lead to some really nice, gentle shading to add a little more detail to your flower as well. So I'll show that one more time. I've got my medium value here. And then I'm going to rinse my brush, get the water on my brush and wipe it off a couple times. Then I'm just running the tip of my brush along the bottom edge of that blue. And it's going to gently fade it down into that flower. So that's kind of a, yeah, just a little shading technique that really comes in handy with flowers. Okay. The ranunculus is very similar to what we did here with the rose. The only difference is we're going to keep our lines a little bit thinner as we put them in. We're not going to press down quite as much like we did here to get that nice variation. Here, the ranunculus has so many petals that are wrapped around. We're going to keep our lines pretty thin. So I'm loading up the brush here with the dark. And I do want to kind of wipe that brush so it squeezes out the excess color. And here I'm going to start, I'll do more of a kind of an oval shape in the middle. But now I'm just going to start working my way around. And these are less of a spiral and more circles that kind of wrap around each other. So they get a little bigger in each layer. And they're very tightly packed. Now I might leave a little bit of space in my line. So I might just have kind of gaps that I put in there. And that just, I think, gives a little more of a natural look. So my lines are starting to take shape here. And we just work our way all the way to the outside. Okay. So there we have our ranunculus. Now what I might do, again with my medium value, just to give some more subtle shading to the outer petals, is get that medium value on the brush and use my, I call it my gradient technique. It's like a shading technique where you use water to gently fade your color. But that outer petal has a little bit of a curve to it. So I'm going to define the bottom edge of that curve with my medium value, then rinse the brush, get clear on it, and fade it down into the very bottom edge. And so what you get is the effect of the petal curving out towards you a little bit. So again, this is just a helpful technique to have in your tool belt to do more subtle shading in a flower. And finally, our little tiny flowers here. These are fairly straightforward. We've got little center points, little dots, and then a very simple stem that I'll lighten my color just a little bit for. And I'm just going to curve my stem down, and they're going to connect. And then I can use my little leaf trick to give it some leaves. And there we go. So, you know, as you continue practicing, we're already at our hour, which I know that goes fast. But the idea is when you're putting these together in a bouquet, you kind of work flower by flower and light to dark. So, you know, let's say I'll bring this example back. And again, we'll be emailing this example out if you want to refer to this as you continue to practice. But basically, I would probably start with these inner flowers, you know, especially these light ones. I would do my first layer of each one. So I would do this anemone, you know, I would do the light and my medium and my dark. But just like we did with that first layer, and then I would move to my next one and my next one. And, you know, it's okay if they overlap a little bit. You want them to overlap. And the beauty of one color is, you know, you don't really notice the overlapping too much. So you can kind of just move from one to the next. And then as those start to dry, you know, you can do your outer flowers and then start adding in your darks. And you just really want to make sure you have good contrast in your bouquet. We really want to utilize our dark color. You know, these leaves kind of frame the lighter flowers of this bouquet. So you're working light to dark to finish the design. But anyway, I hope that kind of prepares you for something a little more complex. The wonderful thing is once you start to understand these basic concepts, you can bring them together and you know, layer them into a lot of complexity. So anyway, I hope that gets you started with botanical work. And thanks again, guys, for being here today. I know that was fast, but hopefully you have a full Saturday ahead and you can just spend a little more time practicing. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Leana, as always. And we will share a recording out. We will email that so you can refer to this as well. And of course, if you have any questions, you want to reach out to Leana directly, we can connect.
I'd love that.
We'd love to see.
Can I show Leana a picture that I did? I wanted to wait to the very end.
Oh,
Sure,
I
Jackie,
love
hold
it.
on.
I'd love to see where. Oh my goodness.
And I
Hold on.
Oh, are those pine trees?
I didn't really know what I was doing when I did this, and I'm not really sure how well you could see
Oh, Jacqueline,
Oh man, Zoom is making it a little blurry. I can see that.
Here we go. Oh shoot, we
Yeah.
can't really see.
Well,
Maybe.
I did some birch trees in the back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's hard to see it. I'll take a picture and message it. I was just like,
Take a picture and email it over.
yeah, one of my family members like didn't believe that I did it because of all the other. It's almost like it's a fluke.
Oh, hey, I mean, you did it though, and yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. You know, the way you learn is really just by doing it and practicing, and sometimes something really clicks and you're like, oh, that's how I do the birch tree, you know. So I love that, Jacqueline. Thanks for sharing.
Does anyone else want to share before we end the call? Okay, well, you can certainly email
Molly, us. Allison, oh my goodness. Beautiful work, ladies. Ah, love it. Love it, love it. Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here. And like Nicole said, feel free to email me anytime if you have watercolor questions. Bye, everybody.
Happy Saturday. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye, Leana. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, Nicole. Sounds
Thanks,
good.
honey.